Hi, thanks for joining us, everyone, and thanks for your patience as we get started today. I'm Carrie Bourne. I'm from the Office of Continuing Education at UW-Whitewater, and each semester we host the Fairhaven Lecture Series. We've been hosting the series since 1983 over at Fairhaven Senior Services, which is just a couple blocks from campus, and we over there and interacting with the community and with the residents of Fairhaven. But this year we've had to pivot a bit, and like everyone else, we are offering our program virtually. We're here today live for this lecture, but we are also recording it, and it will be played internally at Fairhaven Senior Services on Friday. So this semester, like every semester since 1983, we focus on a theme, and our theme is that we are traveling across the globe through time from the U.S. and beyond while staying safe at home. And I'm very excited today that our first sort of trip is to Patagonia with Dr. Andrea Edney. Andrea Edney is currently an associate professor of kinesiology, serving as chair of that department at UW-Whitewater. Her research examines experiences and behavior choices within the contexts of outdoor recreation management and outdoor exercise. Andrea did her PhD in forest resources at the University of Maine and her undergraduate and master's degrees in kinesiology at the University of New Brunswick, Canada. She has worked on the east coast of Canada and Maine as a sea kayak tour guide for more than 15 years and teaches travel study and other outdoor adventure-based courses in addition to class-based courses. Andrea is here today to share about how her travel studies and research experiences in Patagonia relate to the International Healthy Parks, Healthy People agenda, and how nature-based tourism can contribute to human resilience within the context of Patagonia. Please welcome Dr. Andrea Edney.
Thank you, Carrie. Thank you very much. Thanks to all who have joined today. I told Carrie to interrupt me anytime if you have any questions or concerns through the presentation. And all right, I'm just going to share my screen here. There we go. Get my presentation up. Okay. Okay, and so, here, Carrie down. There we go. All right, and hi to everybody at Fairhaven. I so wish I could be there with you today. Normally, I'd be there in a normal semester with one of my classes, either Intro to Recreation or Programming, working with Brian Robinson. We do have I coordinate our internships for our department, and so we do have Stefan and Barrett there. So if you see them anytime, give them a hard time for me, and I'll look very much forward to coming over for a visit as soon as I can. So today I'm going to share some adventures that I've had in Patagonia, both with, we'll look at a bunch of case studies with different classes of students I've brought down to Patagonia on travel study courses. And then also I travel there quite a bit for my research as well. So I'll talk about both. Let's see, I guess I have to do that. There we go. Okay, so the themes of my courses and research relate to building resilience and to healthy parks, healthy people, all through nature-based tourism. And so the idea with resilience is that Chile, like a lot of other countries, over time is becoming more urbanized. And so cities are becoming more dense, and along with other challenges that major cities in Chile have, this urbanization is leading to a disconnection from nature that a lot of people are experiencing, even though they live in a country with an incredible natural resource base. And so this disconnection from nature, causes a lot of challenges, including, mental and physical health challenges everything from depression and anxiety to obesity to you name it. And so the idea being that I work with protected area managers like national park managers to help to make parks more enticing for visitors in order to help people in Chile as well as, you know, national tourists and international tourists to recover from some of the challenges that this disconnection with nature is bringing them. And so that all relates to this international movement that's really been gaining traction over the last few years called Healthy Parks, Healthy People. And so the idea behind Healthy Parks, Healthy People is that when somebody spends time in nature and has kind of immersive experiences in nature, it benefits them psychologically, and then they develop this connection with nature. And then once they're connected with nature, they start to care more about nature itself and protecting nature. So they become advocates for protected areas and supporting of, you know, the managers who are trying to protect those natural resources and to maintain national parks and protected areas in the condition that we want them for the ecosystems themselves and to create excellent visitor experiences. So it's kind of a cycle where somebody benefits personally and then they become more connected, they care more, so the managers are able to protect the place more, and the cycle goes on. So that's what we're kind of exploring through a variety of case studies. So I'll start with a few that relate to some of my classes. And then I'll talk about a couple of one major research project in particular. But before we get into that, I'm just going to very quickly show you from Whitewater where it is that we're talking about in Chile. So here we are. And let's see if I can make this do. Here we go. It's going to do a quick flyover here. So all the way into South America. And this is Patagonia. And so Patagonia is a cultural region. So it includes both the southern ends of Chile and Argentina. And here you can see this white line divides the border. And so the Chilean landscape is super fragmented and wild, and Argentina is much more arid and flat. As you go into Patagonia. And then Patagonia goes, having a little bit of a hard time scrolling here, but all the way south to the end of Chile, which connects very closely to Antarctica. So we are way down at the bottom of South America. So, but this is the region that we're talking about. Okay. Now, bring us back into the presentation. All right, and then more specifically, so this region that that we go to for classes and I work in the most is called the Aysén region of Patagonia. So it's in Chile. And if you look at the region, all of these shades are all national parks and protected areas. So this is a very wild place full of parks and national reserves. Okay, so we're going to go back to 2016, which was the first time I brought a group of students to Patagonia for a travel study course, and we did an 8-day hike in the Henimeni Lake National Reserve. And so for 8 days, we trekked through these mountains, and it was just an incredible journey. It changed the students' lives. In fact, most of the students that I've brought to Patagonia, come back and decide that they've really developed a passion for the outdoors. So they decide they want to work with careers in the outdoors. And even if they don't, in some way they end up relating kind of their interest to what we've been doing through photography or you name it. But this trip certainly hooked me and these students that we had. And so So we hiked along riverbeds. I think over the course of 8 days, we crossed rivers 45 times, wading through the water and camping along our way as we went. The color of the water, this where Sabrina's in a hammock here in front of Lago Verde, that's not photoshopped. The color of the water actually is like that. It's all glacial water. It's one of the few places in the world where you can still drink the water out of lakes and streams without needing to purify it, because it's all coming straight out of tens of thousands year old glaciers. Right in front of us. And so we hiked up to the Henimeni Glacier, which you see here in Laguna Henimeni, which is just gorgeous. And so in this hike, you know, the Patagonian landscape is incredibly varied, but this region, it's like walking through a salad bowl, to be honest. There are no berries that are dangerous to eat. You can pretty much try any plant that you walk past. And the wildlife are just incredible. So in the bottom left here, we have a huemule, which is an endangered species of deer that pretty much only live in this region, and the largest part of the population is there. So there's a lot of efforts to protect the huemule, but we got to see a lot of them. And then up here on the right is guanacos, and so they're like wild llamas that just kind of roam the territory. And so it's incredible. There's no big predators, no spiders, snakes, or anything. The only predator is the puma, which is a wildcat, but they're incredibly timid, and there are plenty of grazing sheep for them to eat, so you don't really have to worry about them. This blueberry in the bottom right is called the calafate, and so it's a native berry. And the story is, if you eat them, you will keep coming back to Patagonia. So we have all eaten a lot of calafates. So in that journey, we traveled from Henimeni, which is a national reserve, into Parque Patagonia. And this was kind of the lesson that our students were learning along the way that relates to healthy parks, healthy people, and resilience. Is this was the first place where the Tompkins Conservation Group came in and started to buy land. So some people who are pretty into conservation in the US have a lot of interest in Patagonia, and it stems from this group. And so they are owners of Patagonia and the North Face, which are some pretty big outdoor retail brands. And since the 60s, they have they'd eaten their calafates and fallen in love with Patagonia and continued to go there year after year. And eventually they started to buy up land. And Parque Patagonia, which attaches to Henimeni, was the first park that they bought. And over time now they've bought just an incredible amounts of land and handed the land to Chile to manage as parks. And then they've encouraged strongly Chile to develop this route of the parks through the region of Aysén, connecting 17 national parks. And it's just had, I mean, it's been positive in terms of protecting wildlife and the landscape, but it's brought with it some challenges in terms of maybe getting ahead of where the country and the region is at in terms of its capability to welcome more visitors. So, you know, for example, the parks just are not staffed by people like we would know here. Two gigantic national parks together might have one park ranger managing huge territories. And another example is this route that you see in different colors traveling through the country. Big parts of it, most of it, is still just an old beat up dirt road. And once you get south, it's not even a road. You have to take boats across, and there might be just like a gaucho, like a rancher who might have a barge who could carry a vehicle across on a boat, but it's certainly not commercialized to the level that this development is happening. So there's a lot of work there in terms of community resilience and involving people who are there in the protection of these areas and doing it at a pace that is not going to overrun the place with a crazy amount of visitors. So that's kind of the Henny Many case study. All right, and then we'll move to Cerro Castillo, which I think it was 2017. I brought another class of students to this national park, and we did another 8-day trek through the mountains. This one the landscape is way more dramatic and jagged. It's not even a trail, it's a path, they will call it, meaning a GPS path. So it's not obvious where you would walk to follow the trail. But we started at the north end at this place called Las Horquetas and walked through the valleys and up and down and around this majestic mountains and glaciers and into the village of Cerro Castillo. So just incredible, walking alongside glaciers and the vastness of it and the bright teal lagoons, and we had crazy weather. It was an incredible adventure, to say the least. And so one of the lessons that we focused on through this class was thinking about the stems of the region. So I mentioned with Parque Patagonia and the route of the parks, this idea of a road going through the region is something that they're really not ready for. So Cerro Castillo is one of the first sections of actual paved road that has been made. And that is a huge culture shock for people in Patagonia. I mean, people living, a few miles outside of a village, would need to travel by horseback. And this is only like 10 or 12 years ago that a trip into a village would take days. And now they can have a car and hop into a car and get there. And it's just a huge culture change, but they're also, learning firsthand about the impact of the road on wildlife, wildlife corridors, and also the sounds of the traffic affecting wildlife. And not that there's a lot of traffic, but when you had none and then you move to some, it's quite notable. And then another kind of cultural and nature tourism related opportunity is this paved path. The road is called the Carretera Astral. And so it's a real sought out major adventure to bike the carretera. But that, is because there's never any traffic on it, and, people come from all over the world to do it, and you can camp anywhere along the way. And so having the paved road is really changing that in a positive way, but in a way that kind of needs to be monitored so it doesn't get too far ahead of where the place can sustain. And then up top, this kind of dirt path here just shows one of the things in Cerro Castillo is where we don't actually have trails. You just have kind of unofficial paths going through a national park. And there's really only one path through the whole length of the park. At parts of it, if it's not managed properly, it gets eroded and washed out and everything. And so, it's another kind of healthy park side of the dilemma on how do you manage it when visitation is starting to grow a little bit, and we're really just at the threshold where things are starting to increase. So that was a Cerro Castillo lesson. And then Laguna San Rafael National Park is, so we call it, it's this glacier we call the northern ice fields. It's the northern part of the region of Aysén. And it's just an incredible national park. I've been here several times. And so Puerto Tranquil, so the road actually comes into this little village up here on the right. And then it's quite a trek up to the glacier from this village. But you start hiking in, and then as you walk, the path turns to rocks, and then you start to notice that under the rocks there's ice, and you start to see chunks of ice until you gradually climb right up onto the glacier. Once you get onto solid ice, you put crampons on your feet, so they have like just metal spikes on the bottom of your feet so you can walk on the ice, and there's a bunch of safety measures and equipment and everything. But this one you can just walk for miles along the ice fields and through tunnels in the ice, and it's just incredible. So it's always a favorite national park to go to. And so this village on the top right is Puerto Tranquil. And so just a tiny little village. What's crazy about it is, again, because there's just no capacity of the national parks, there's no available certification for guides to be able to bring people onto the ice. So people do it unofficially. So they'll have these little shops offering to bring people up onto the ice. But if a law enforcement person or a ranger comes into town, which doesn't happen too often, but when it does, they all just quick actually collapse their shops and hide them so that they're not seen. So it's quite a sight to be seen. And then just the visitor management on the glacier is always interesting too. This sign here, I mean, the English translation is kind of fun. It says, "Mr. Visitor, trash that you generate." Oh, my photo's actually on top of it. "In this visit, please place it in appropriate places outside protected areas." And it said, "Wilderness areas are not areas of waste." And so it's just kind of fun to see messaging that you probably wouldn't see in the US. But one thing that one thing that happened at Laguna San Rafael, it's actually happened twice. It happened one in 2015, which this article is about, and it happened again in 2017. Is that it was so GLOFs, our glacial lake outburst floods. So basically like a lake forms underneath a glacier, and then when things shift, all of a sudden a huge amount of water can be released from the glacier. And so, when that happened in 2017, the whole community of Puerto Tranquillo was, the community itself wasn't underwater, but all of the connecting, well, we'll call them roads, but kind of paths that vehicles could take and everything to get in and out were submerged by like 25 feet of water. And basically, they were completely disconnected from the glacier and all of their livelihoods for a couple of years. So it's this whole national park just became inaccessible. And GLOFs are becoming more common with climate change and more melting on glaciers. I can see them in the news every once in a while. I think there was one recently over the weekend where, people, they happen really suddenly. And if people are in the wrong place at the wrong time, it can be really dangerous. Thankfully, nobody was hurt with either of these, but it just had a massive effect on the nature-based tourism industry and on people in these tiny villages. Okay, so those were a few examples from classes that I've taken, and I've brought other groups. I have so many more examples to share, but I wanted to share a little bit about my research down there as well, and some of the expeditions and involvement I've had in that way. So for research, when I started becoming involved, it just kind of fell into place because the people that I worked with on organizing travel study courses, one of them also works at a research station, and they had just been hired out to write visitor use plans for 6 of the national parks in the region, and they just had a gap of expertise that I could fill, and so I got invited to be involved. And so I've been involved in writing visitor use plans for the national parks, and then also in a project that's grown out of it has been learning about soundscapes and natural sounds in protected areas. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the very first research expedition I did, which was to do a visitor use plan for Bernardo O'Higgins National Park. And it actually was the impetus for their soundscapes research as well. And with sounds, what we do is learn, we measure, and then survey people to compare how people are perceiving natural and human sounds in protected areas, and how those perceptions are affecting their experiences and visitor intentions, and also like how they compare to the actual levels, objective levels of sounds that we're hearing, and how that might affect wildlife. But then ultimately we try to file it back into that cycle of developing motivations and connections to a landscape, and how to build that partnership between people, healthy people and healthy parks in return. Okay, so Bernardo O'Higgins is on the southern ice field. So this is one of the largest glaciers left in the world. It is at the south of this region, very, very difficult to access from Chile. Here you can see how broken up the landscape is on the Chilean side, and then in Argentina, where it looks more arid, there's actually a road that goes all the way down to El Chalten here. And so one thing that is crazy about this national park is Chile and Argentina are not clear on where the border is. And so the border follows the Andes Mountains, up above this region, but then the mountains form a circle. It's called the Cerro de los Alteres, and then it goes linear down below this area. But the mountains in the circle are just incredible. Fitzroy is in this area, and it's one of the most sought mountains for rock climbing, but just for its beauty in the whole world. And so both countries really want this area because they see the opportunity for nature-based tourism. And Chile has rights to it, but the problem is the land is so fragmented and they don't have good access to it, whereas Argentinians can drive right up to it. And so Argentina actually has built this community, El Chalten, and they said this is going to be a mountaineering town, and they've built a whole economy around it. But the problem is Chile has rights over it, and so Chile's concerned that Argentina is going to try to gain rights and ownership over the land because they can prove that they have economic ties to it. And so Chile is curious to see if we can develop better access for nature-based tourism to defend their rights to the land. So all this on top of coming up with a visitor use plan to actually protect the land. So it was an amazing project. So our first expedition was to explore Bernardo O'Higgins from Chile and try to see if there were, some better or relatively doable, feasible access points from the Chilean side. So these are some of my research colleagues. They come from all over the world that we did this with. Okay, so Tortella is a community that's just above the national park. Here, I'm going to go back to the map just quickly. So Tortella is way up here. And this is where the road ends. And I say that's kind of funny that that's the absolute furthest you can get by road. That includes parts where you have to put your car on a barge to get there, but there is a road that gets there. There's no road through this. I guess it really is a city of Tortella or large village anyway. So the whole, aside from kind of the dead end path that you could use a vehicle to get to, taking days, most people get here by boat. And there's this beautiful walking path along, like a built dock along the entire length of the city. I think it spans over a mile. But then, as you can see from this middle picture, there's houses all the way up the hill here, but you have to climb. Like, there are no roads or paths or anything. There might be like staircases built into the side of the mountain, but it's a lot of climbing to get up to these houses. And then all of their supplies have to come in by boat, and it's a long boat ride. So this is a pretty, it's just such an incredible village, but just so remote and disconnected. And so our journey left from Tortella by boat to try to access the glacier from the Chilean side. So we were on this boat for off and on for 10 days. This was our beauty, the island. An old fishing boat that, let's just say if it was a hotel, it wouldn't have any stars. But we traveled in this boat through the fjords, incredibly rough conditions. Just an amazing adventure. And then we brought with us, we're in this bottom picture here, a couple little zodiacs for whenever we needed to travel in shallower water. We could use those little boats to access a little bit better. And then we just tried. We had a few different routes planned out that we wanted to explore to see if we could access the national park. And a lot of them were either dead ends due to the glaciers shifting, or just too difficult. But we just saw incredible landscapes and found, the botany and lichen that we found along the way was just amazing. And just looking at, places where we had hoped to make our way through, having glaciers in the way, and just the landscape being incredibly difficult to navigate. We had to make our way up the stream. It took an entire day of fording our zodiacs up the stream to try to find if we could find an access point above it, and we couldn't. And then there was this one path that we knew that some people in Chile had used to access the ice fields, so where we wanted to get to is where Argentina has that whole village, the mountaineering village of El Chalten. Chile has one dome on the ice, and we wanted to see if we could get to that dome, because the idea being that then Chile could invest in building that dome up to more of kind of a mountaineering central base on the ice fields. So we had a 4-day expedition along this path, trying to make our way up onto the ice. And we did find a way up, but it is pretty difficult to navigate, leaving Chile with some struggles in terms of building their nature-based tourism operation in this national park. So that was the first expedition. And then the second expedition was another crazy adventure where, so one of my research colleagues, Andres, is from Spain, and myself being from here, we went into Argentina from Patagonia on a little bit of a recon mission for Chile, to find out about how Argentina represents the border, in order to learn more about kind of where we might stand in terms of the battle over this region. So this mountain, this is Fitzroy here, you know, just absolutely phenomenal landscape in this area. So we traveled by road, by boat, and then had to hike this path, which brings you into Argentina from Chile. And so where the road goes further south on the Argentinian side, that Carretera Austral, I was telling you that people like to bike. So they will start in Argentina because you can go further south, and then they'll bike up to where you can take this pass into Chile. But because the two countries are battling over the territory, they will not build a path, you know, between the two countries. Argentina's wanted to keep things split, so it's a few days where you have to hike over this unfriendly trail to get between the two countries. And so that's what we did. And the whole time we were taking stock, and any time there was a representation of Argentina or Chile, even along the trek. And then once we got into El Chalten, you know, we took inventory of all the maps we could find to see kind of how the region was portrayed in maps being made by Argentina. And then we did this expedition, and we tracked kind of where Argentinians companies were going and where they thought the border was compared to where Chile thinks the border is. So it was kind of a pretty significant recon mission for Chile and Argentina. And the whole time we went undercover as soundscape researchers. So we may not have told them that we were there spying for Chile. So this is really our first soundscape project at the same time, and it's where the whole the last few years of my research career has started from. But this expedition around the Cerro, it was supposed to be a 10-day expedition up on the southern ice fields, and we did it in 7 because we had bad weather coming, and you know it's incredibly exposed up on the ice, but just phenomenal. Hiking up to the glacier, you know. Incredibly rugged. Like we had to make our own zip lines to get across huge gorges, and you'd have to build a rock wall to hide your tent behind it because the wind was so intense that it would rip your tent apart in a couple of minutes if you didn't. And river crossings, but just absolutely phenomenal. And we climbed up onto the ice fields. And we're there for a few days, and just incredible. So where I am in this picture, there were large portions where you could walk in those crampons along the ice. But then we did have snowy conditions, which is a little bit frightening up on glaciers because the snow wasn't very deep, so you couldn't see where the crevices were in the ice. So we needed to walk apart and tie ourselves to each other in case somebody would fall down a crevice, so we could stop and save each other. So it was intense, but just an incredible journey up through the Cerro. And we did make it to Chiles Dome up in the middle of the ice. It kind of feels like you're walking into a little spaceship up there. I didn't have a picture of the outside of it, but it does just kind of look like a little spaceship. And that's all it is a little bunker on the ice. That's Chile's perch. But yeah, just incredible. The wind on the ice fields is so intense. If you're going to stop walking, you have to dig a hole or hide yourself. So it's the top of our snowshoes peeking up from our hole. We were taking a break. We had to walk for I think over 35 kilometers in our snowshoes across the snow over the ice one day because we knew we needed to get out of there before the wind and the weather picked up. But just so vast and wild and incredible up there. And that was our second journey. And so what we did find was that the border is definitely represented differently from the Argentinian side than it is from the Chilean side. And you know, this issue is still unresolved as it is right now. Chile is looking, and they're making a little bit of progress about beefing up their dome on the ice, but still really struggling to find ways to access Bernardo Higgins. There's still doesn't have a full-time park ranger, you know, but there's a plan. The Tompkins Foundation that I had talked about, the group from the U.S. buying land in Chile, are saying that by 2050 they want a road, you know, an actual access way down here to increase the amount of tourism. But as we stand, you know, there's just so many things that need to get figured out, and in a way that's sustainable and that benefits the communities and those little villages in Chile. And so that's kind of where we are. And so we're moving forward, you know, with those plans and my research there. You know, I didn't talk very much about the soundscapes research, but it's really ballooning. Now we have multiple partners throughout the US and in Patagonia, and on a separate contract, I'm editing a book with a bunch of partners in Chile and Argentina, and some partners in the US about nature-based tourism and in Patagonia. And so the work continues. Yeah, we just keep plugging along. So that was my presentation. And so, Carrie, I can minimize.
Thank you, Andrea. Those photos are absolutely breathtaking. I mean, you can't even believe those sorts of things are even real and exist in the world. That's amazing, just absolutely amazing. I forgot to remind the people in the beginning that if you do have a question, we'll take those questions now, and if you'll put them in the chat area, we will. I'll read them out and we can share them. You know, one of the questions I had is you were sort of describing this national park system that's probably not even a system. But, you know, the national park system in the United States is 150 years old, and, you know, is a really large operation. Are they doing any modeling based on that, or, you know, how are they sort of beefing up, or, you know, what are their plans for this national park system there?
Yeah, they are, you know, they're pretty connected with the National Park Service in the US. And then, so folks, Patagonia attracts a very international base, you know, and so there's a lot of guidelines and models made by the United Nations also that they're following in terms of national park development and maintenance. The challenge is that they're doing it all on a non-budget, right? So that's how it kind of differs from the ways that things are done in the US. But yeah, no, it's a pretty opportune time to be involved with that, because there's a lot of amazing initiatives going on to incorporate communities and sustainability, and they're a big part of their management model is scenario planning, right? Mm-hmm. And so instead of investing in one sure future, they use all sorts of models of integrated development to develop these scenarios and try to plan for to be as maneuverable and flexible as possible, because they just don't have the human power to manage the space that they have. So,
yeah, that's interesting, and it kind of goes along with a question that's in the chat here. Maybe the person asked, how much do they estimate the glaciers may have changed recently? You know, due to global warming, how much loss has there been? You know, is that part of the scenario planning as well?
Yeah, the glaciers are changing incredibly fast. I mean, it's absolutely shocking, and I don't have off the top of my head data on that, but I mean, you can see it. It's so obvious even to the bare eye. You can see just traveling around there where the glaciers were a short while ago, where the forest hasn't even regrown yet, you know. And just like, you know, the scenario where we go to these places, and we don't even know where the glaciers are going to be, you know, because they're moving so much and separating. And so, yeah, no, it's happening incredibly fast there.
Yeah, yeah. Another interesting question from the chat is, what impact does the wine industry, both in Chile and Argentina, have in Patagonia and the preservation of the environment?
Mm, good question. One of my research partners actually has studied kind of gastronomy and its impact on the area quite a bit, and she's written a few books about it. Yeah, I'm not sure. Like I know that so again, because you know, that region is just so culturally diverse where there's settlements, you know, from all over the world. And so I mean, wine is a common denominator, and then there's, you know, certain, you know, Chilean and Argentinian wines that they're incredibly proud of, and it's a big part of the economy. But then again, there's just little pockets of culture from, you know, seemingly random places that
Yeah.
kind of put their tilt on it. I think the you know, because Chile is obviously such a long country, and most of the winemaking is not right in Patagonia. But it does definitely contribute to the economy there.
Hmm.
And it
Hmm.
contributes to tourism. I'm not sure quite yet how it contributes to protected areas, but
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
lots of opportunities for research and sort of economic opportunities for the communities there. It's really fascinating. How and how many times have you taken UW-Whitewater students along?
We've done 4. Yep, travel studies with
Hmm.
students.
Hmm. And it must be an enormous amount of planning because, again, I'm thinking of these scenario plannings, and you said the weather changes so quickly, or or those sorts of things. So you must have to be prepared for just about anything.
Oh, it is, you know, and the year they had that GLAF in San Rafael, I mean, I was planning on going there up until a few weeks ahead of our trip, and we had to completely reroute and
Mhm.
start again, you know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you called it, I think, adventure tourism. So it sounds like that's part of the adventure. Yeah. So it looks like we have no more questions in the box, but I do want to thank everyone for joining us today. And we recorded the lecture. This question just came up. We will post it on our website. So if you go to the continuing education at UW-Whitewater, the Fairhaven lecture series is there, and this will be posted on our website later this week. I'm going to go ahead and stop recording. Thank everyone for joining us today. We really appreciate you joining us.